Hi there, and welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's mystery begins with a sound. A piano playing softly at midnight in an empty manor. No one was seen near it. No one was supposed to be there. Yet the music drifted through the halls, delicate and deliberate, as if someone or something wanted to be heard. When the morning came, a body was found in that same room. The final note still hung in the air, and beside the piano, a single glove. But for Hercule Poirot, every note, every pause, and every silence is a clue waiting to be heard. Stay with us till the end. And if you enjoy mysteries that whisper from the dark, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Haunting Vales. Chapter 1. The piano begins to play. It began, as all strange stories do, on an evening too calm to trust. The rain had stopped an hour ago, leaving the London streets glistening like wet glass beneath the faint glow of the lamps. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 11, its echo fading into the silence of the night. And then there it was, a single piano note, soft, lingering, uncertain. It came from the grand hall of Blackwood Manor, a house that had not heard music in years. The sound was faint but deliberate, like a whisper from a locked room. Detective Hercule Poirot, small, neat, and precise, was not in the habit of chasing ghosts. But tonight, even he could not deny the chill that crept along his spine as he stood in that hallway, listening. The invitation had come only hours before. A brief letter, written in trembling ink. Monsieur Poirot, I beg of you, come at once to Blackwood Manor. Something terrible is happening. My husband says it is only the wind, but I hear the piano. It plays every night at midnight. No one is there. Please help us. Eleanor Whitfield. Poirot had read it twice, frowning thoughtfully. He had heard many strange things in his time, but music playing itself was new, even for him. Now, standing in the dark hallway of the manor, he turned to the butler, a thin, silver-haired man whose hands trembled despite his rigid posture. "Tell me, Mr. Grayson," Poirot said quietly, his voice steady. "Who is in the house tonight?" "Only the family, sir. Mrs. Whitfield, her husband Charles, and their niece, Miss Clara. The servants, most of them have left. They couldn't stand it." "Couldn't stand what?" "The music, sir. It plays every night, always at the same time. Midnight." As if summoned by his words, the grandfather clock in the foyer began its slow climb to 12. Each chime sounded heavier than the last, pressing against the silence like a heartbeat. Poirot stepped toward the hall doors, his polished shoes clicking softly on the marble floor. The butler followed a few paces behind, wringing his hands. The piano played again. This time, it was no uncertain note. It was a melody, haunting, graceful, and filled with sorrow. The kind of song that carries memory, regret, and something else beneath it, despair. Poirot pushed the door open. The grand hall was empty. Candles flickered on the far wall, their light trembling across the ivory surface of the grand piano. The keys moved, gently one by one, as if pressed by invisible fingers. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the music stopped. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Poirot's eyes moved slowly across the room, to the open curtains, the faint breeze, the long mirror opposite the piano that reflected both men perfectly. "Tell me," Poirot murmured, "has anyone ever seen who plays it?" The butler shook his head. "No, sir, but they say it's the lady, the one who used to play." Poirot turned his gaze back to the piano. "And who was that?" "Mrs. Whitfield's sister, Miss Margaret. She died 3 years ago in that very room." Poirot's brow furrowed. "And how did she die?" The butler's voice dropped. "They say she fell down the grand staircase, broke her neck, but some say she was pushed." A pause hung in the air, longer than the silence itself. Poirot ran a hand along the piano's edge. The surface was clean, too clean, as if someone had polished it recently. But there was dust on the keys, faint traces on some, and none on others. He bent closer. There were fingerprints, small, delicate, as if from a woman's hand. He straightened, his mind already turning. Eleanor Whitfield appeared in the doorway, then, a pale, slender woman wrapped in a dark shawl, her eyes rimmed with sleepless worry. "Mr. Poirot," she whispered. "You heard it, didn't you? The piano." "Yes, madam. I heard it. It's been happening for weeks now. Every night at midnight. Always the same melody. The one my sister played before she stopped, swallowing hard. Before she died. And your husband? What does he think? He says it's the wind, that I'm imagining it. But I know the sound. I could never forget that song." Poirot looked at her carefully. Her hands were trembling, but her fear seemed real, not imagined. "Tell me," he said gently, "what happened the night she died?" Eleanor hesitated. "It was a storm. There was an argument. My sister was upset. She said she wanted to leave the house, but Charles wouldn't let her. He said she was unstable, that she was ruining the family's name. Later that night, we heard a scream, and when we found her, she was lying at the bottom of the stairs." "And was there an investigation?" "Yes. The police ruled it an accident. But I never believed that." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why not?" She looked toward the piano. "Because the song that plays every night is the same one she played the evening before she died." Later that night, Poirot wandered the halls of the manor. The place was vast, filled with shadows and secrets. The portraits seemed to watch as he passed. He found himself drawn to the staircase, grand, sweeping, and lined with candles that flickered faintly in the draught. At its base, the floor bore a faint crack, the kind that comes from a heavy fall. He knelt, studying it closely. A faint stain had seeped into the wood, barely visible in the dim light. Not blood, but something else. Polish? Varnish? He made a note to return to it in the morning. A sound made him freeze. Footsteps. Slow, careful, coming from above. Poirot turned his head toward the landing. A figure stood there, still and silent, half shrouded in darkness. It was a woman, her hair loose, her gown pale as moonlight. "Mrs. Whitfield?" Poirot called softly. The figure didn't move. Then, in a single motion, it turned and vanished down the corridor. Poirot rushed forward, his polished shoes slipping slightly on the smooth steps. When he reached the top, the hallway was empty. He turned the corner. Nothing. Only an open window, curtains billowing with the cold night air. But on the floor, by the window, lay something small and shining. A single piano key, broken from its board. Poirot picked it up, turning it between his fingers. It smelled faintly of dust and perfume. He looked back toward the darkened hall. "So," he murmured, "you are still here, mademoiselle, still playing your song." By morning, the house seemed ordinary again. The lights softened the edges of the night's terrors, and the breakfast table was neatly laid. Charles Whitfield greeted Poirot with forced civility. A tall man, neatly dressed, with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "I trust you slept well, Mr. Poirot." "Perfectly, thank you. Though your piano, it keeps strange hours." Charles's smile stiffened. "My wife's imagination, I'm afraid. She has never recovered from her sister's death. I've begged her to stop inviting outsiders into our private affairs." "Then perhaps you should have written the letter yourself, monsieur." Whitfield's eyes flashed, but he said nothing. Poirot stirred his tea. "You were married to Eleanor's sister, were you not?" "For a short time," Charles said, his tone clipped. "It was unfortunate." Poirot looked up. "Unfortunate in what way?" "She was unstable, dramatic, always hearing things, seeing things. I did everything I could for her." Poirot nodded slowly. "And now, her piano plays by itself." Whitfield's jaw tightened. "Superstition, nothing more." Poirot smiled faintly. "Of course. Yet even superstition leaves traces of truth behind." After breakfast, Poirot asked to see the piano again. This time, daylight revealed details the night had hidden. The keys bore faint marks of moisture, not condensation, but tears. Someone had wept over the instrument recently. The seat had been moved slightly, as if used. Poirot lifted the lid. Inside, among the strings, something gleamed faintly. A small silver locket. He drew it out carefully. Inside was a faded photograph, a woman with kind eyes and a quiet smile. Margaret Whitfield. On the back, in neat handwriting, "To Charles for every song we shared." Poirot stared at it for a long moment. Then he replaced it gently and closed the lid. He turned to see Eleanor watching him from the doorway. "I didn't know that locket was there," she whispered. "No," Poirot asked softly. "Then who would have placed it inside?" I don't know." He studied her face. She looked frightened, but not of him. Of something else. Something she couldn't name. That evening, the storm returned. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rolled across the moors. The manor's walls seemed to shudder with each flash of lightning. Poirot sat in the study, notebook open before him. He had drawn the timeline of Margaret's death, the household accounts, and the letters Eleanor had kept from her sister. They told a story of jealousy, of inheritance, of love turned bitter. At exactly midnight, the piano began again. This time, the melody was faster. Urgent, angry. Poirot rose and crossed the hall. The sound drew him closer, louder with every step. The candles had gone out. Only lightning lit the room. The piano played, violently now, as if the unseen hand struck the keys in rage. The sound filled the air, thick and trembling. Poirot stepped forward and laid his hand on the lid. The music stopped. He opened it. Nothing. Only silence. Then, a whisper behind him. "Leave it alone." He turned sharply. Eleanor stood in the doorway, pale and wide-eyed. But her voice had changed. Lower. Stronger. Poirot watched her closely. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, "are you all right?" Her eyes seemed distant. "She doesn't want you here." "Who doesn't?" Eleanor blinked, then gasped, as if waking from a dream. "Mr. Poirot? What happened?" "You spoke," he said gently, "but it was not your voice." She shook her head, trembling. "I don't remember. I just heard the music and came running." Poirot looked toward the piano. "It seems, madam, that the past still has something to say." He walked back to his room long after the storm had faded. The house was still now, but the air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves remembered too much. He placed the broken piano key on the table beside his notebook and stared at it in the candlelight. Something about it troubled him. A faint mark along its edge, not a crack but a scratch, the kind made by metal. He compared it to the others in his notes, and then he saw it. A pattern. The same set of keys pressed each night formed not just a melody, but a message. A coded rhythm. 3 notes. Pause. 2. 1. He tapped them gently on the table. SOS. Poirot leaned back his chair, eyes narrowing. The piano wasn't haunted. It was crying for help. And someone in this house was making sure no one heard it clearly, except at midnight. Chapter 2. The Secrets Beneath the Keys. Morning light spilled across the halls of Blackwood Manor, chasing away the shadows of the night before. The storm had left the grounds drenched and the sky still heavy with cloud. But for Hercule Poirot, the new day brought clarity and questions. He stood once again before the grand piano, gloved hands folded neatly behind his back. The polished surface reflected his small frame like a dark mirror. The locket he had discovered remained open on the music stand, the photograph inside staring up at him. A love token, yes, but also a clue. Eleanor had sworn she didn't know it existed. Charles had not mentioned it at all, and yet it had been hidden inside the instrument that played at midnight, as if left there by a hand that no longer belonged to this world. Poirot's eyes moved from the keys to the frame of the instrument itself. The casing bore faint scratches, uneven, deliberate. He bent low, tracing one with a fingertip. A mark, not from careless use, but from something being pried open. Mr. Poirot? The voice belonged to Clara Whitfield, the niece, a quiet girl of perhaps 20, dressed plainly, with dark, observant eyes. "I didn't mean to startle you," she said softly. "Aunt Eleanor asked me to bring you tea." Poirot smiled faintly. "Merci. Thank you, Miss Clara. You are very kind." He noticed the way she looked at the piano, her expression wary. "You have heard it play, have you not?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "Yes. I tried not to believe it, but it plays even when no one is near. I thought maybe it was a trick. Maybe Uncle Charles set something inside it to scare Aunt Eleanor. But then I saw it myself." "You saw it?" Poirot's eyes sharpened. "What exactly did you see?" Her fingers tightened around the tray. The keys moved. Slowly, one at a time. There was no one sitting there. Poirot nodded. "And what time was this?" "Always at midnight," she said. "Never before. Never after. As if it waits for that exact moment." Poirot turned toward the clock on the far wall. "Ah, yes. The precision of time. It is often the one witness that cannot be bribed." He examined the instrument again, his gaze drawn to the underside of the keyboard. Something gleamed faintly beneath the wood. He crouched, peering closer. A small wire. Very thin, almost invisible in the dim light, but definitely there. It ran from the underside of the piano toward the floor, disappearing into the boards. Poirot followed it with his eyes. The wire vanished through a narrow crack near the left leg of the piano, descending beneath the floorboards. He straightened. "Tell me, Miss Clara, where does this room sit within the house?" "It's above the old wine cellar," she said. "No one goes there anymore. The door is locked." "Locked, you say?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Then perhaps we should find the key." The cellar door was old, iron-bound, and buried beneath layers of dust. Grayson, the butler, had to search through several drawers before he found the correct key, a heavy piece of metal that looked older than the house itself. When the door finally creaked open, the air that rose from below was damp and sour, carrying the scent of earth and age. Poirot descended slowly, lantern in hand. The steps were narrow, uneven. Cobwebs hung in thick strands across the low beams. At the bottom, the cellar stretched out in darkness. Rows of ancient bottles, old crates, and forgotten furniture covered in sheets. "Stay close, Mr. Grayson," Poirot murmured. The dust of neglect often hides the footprints of the guilty. He scanned the floor, eyes narrowed. Beneath the powdery film of dust, a faint line glimmered, the continuation of the wire from above. It snaked across the stone floor and vanished behind a wooden panel near the back wall. Poirot knelt, setting down his lantern. "Ah, so the ghost requires electricity, does it?" He pried the panel loose. Behind it was a small mechanical device, crude but clever. A set of gears, a motor, and a spool of wire connected to a battery pack. He turned the mechanism gently. The piano above responded with a single, distant note. Grayson gasped. Poirot smiled grimly. "There is your haunting, my friend. Someone wished the instrument to play, but not by supernatural means." He studied the motor more closely. It was new, recently installed. The wires were clean, uncorroded, and near the battery case, a small handkerchief had been wedged into the corner. He pulled it free. The initials stitched into the cloth were delicate and unmistakable. E.W. "Eleanor Whitfield," Grayson whispered. Poirot said nothing. He folded the handkerchief carefully and placed it into his pocket. "Mr. Grayson," he said at last, "tell me honestly, what do you think of your mistress?" The old butler hesitated. "She's kind, sir, but she's not been herself since Miss Margaret died. Sometimes she wanders the house at night, talking to her sister. I've found her asleep in the music room before." "And Mr. Whitfield?" "Cold man, sir. Polite but cold. Since Miss Margaret's death, He's been different. The house used to be full of laughter. Now it's only he trailed off. Only that piano. Poirot's gaze lingered on the machine. Someone had gone to great effort to make the impossible seem real. But why? He replaced the panel carefully and rose. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson. That will be all for now." Upstairs, the atmosphere had shifted. Rain began again outside, tapping gently against the tall windows. Eleanor waited for him in the sitting room, pale and anxious. "You were gone so long," she said. "Did you find anything?" Poirot studied her face. "I found a mechanism. It connects from the piano to the cellar below. It appears the music is encouraged to play itself." She stared at him, horrified. "Are you saying someone built it to do that?" "Indeed. Someone with access to the house, time, and motive." "But who would do such a thing?" she whispered. "That, madam," Poirot said softly, "is the question we must answer. But tell me, do you recognize this?" He handed her the handkerchief. She stared at it, her face paling further. "That's mine, but I don't know how it got there." Poirot watched her closely. "You do not sleepwalk, perhaps?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "Since Margaret died, I wake up in different rooms. I don't remember how I got there." "Ah," Poirot murmured. Then perhaps the hands that placed it there were not aware of what they did. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Do you think I—" "No, I could never." Poirot raised a hand gently. "No, madam. I think you are being used." Later that afternoon, Poirot took a quiet walk through the manor gardens with Clara. The air smelled of wet soil and dying roses. "She's been getting worse," Clara said softly. "Aunt Eleanor. Uncle says it's grief. But sometimes I think she's afraid of him." "Afraid?" Poirot asked, glancing at her. "Why so?" "He's always watching her, controlling what she does. When the piano first started, she begged him to leave the house for a while. He refused. He said there was nothing to fear, but he never sleeps at midnight. He sits awake, waiting. Waiting for what? I don't know. But I heard him once in his study, talking to someone on the telephone. He said, 'She'll lose her mind before the will changes.'" Poirot stopped walking. "The will?" "Yes. Aunt Margaret left everything to Aunt Eleanor when she died. The house, the accounts, all of it. But I overheard Uncle say there was a clause that allows the inheritance to revert to him if she's declared unfit." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah, now we begin to see the shape of the music." Clara looked puzzled. "You think Uncle Charles—" "I think, Miss Clara," Poirot said quietly, "that the piano at midnight is not playing a song, but a trap." That night, Poirot stayed awake. The rain had stopped again, and the house was silent, too silent. He sat in the dark study, watching the clock. His notebook lay open before him. The broken piano key, the locket, the wire, the handkerchief, all pieces of a melody that was beginning to make sense. At 5 minutes to midnight, Poirot rose and moved quietly toward the grand hall. He hid behind one of the large curtains, just beyond the piano's edge. The clock struck 12. A faint click sounded from below, the motor in the cellar. The piano keys began to move, slow and ghost-like. The melody returned. Poirot's eyes shifted toward the doorway. Eleanor entered, barefoot, her shawl hanging loosely from her shoulders. Her expression was vacant, her eyes distant. She walked straight to the piano and sat. Her hands hovered above the keys, but did not move. The notes continued to play on their own. Poirot watched unmoving. Then, another figure appeared. Charles Whitfield. He stood in the doorway, a faint smile on his face. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he whispered. "She plays even when she's asleep." Poirot stepped out from the shadows. "And you, monsieur, you compose even when others suffer." Charles froze. "Poirot, what are you doing here?" "Observing, listening, and now understanding." Charles's voice hardened. "You think you know everything, but you don't understand what she's become." Poirot's tone remained calm. "On the contrary, I understand perfectly. You created the illusion of a haunted piano to convince your wife she was losing her mind so that you could claim the estate. Charles's expression twisted. You can't prove that. Poirot stepped closer. I do not need to. The mechanism beneath the floor, the wire, the motor, the fingerprints, they tell their own story. Charles glanced toward Eleanor, who still sat motionless, her eyes open but unseeing. She won't remember any of it, he said quietly. No one will believe her. She hears things that aren't there. Poirot's voice was low but firm. Not anymore. He raised his hand, and from the shadows, Grayson appeared with Clara beside him. They had seen everything. Eleanor blinked slowly, as if waking. The piano fell silent. What happened?" she whispered. Poirot placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You are safe now, madam. The music will play no more." Charles took a step back, his composure cracking. "You've ruined everything," he hissed. She was weak. It was only a matter of time before she broke. Poirot looked at him steadily. "No, monsieur. It is you who has broken, and you will answer for it." By dawn, the manor was quiet again. The police had come and gone, taking Charles Whitfield with them. The mechanism in the cellar was dismantled. Eleanor sat in the music room, the morning light soft on her face. "I don't understand," she said. "Why did he do it?" Poirot smiled sadly. "Gree, madam. It is a melody older than any piano could play." Clara stood beside her aunt, holding her hand. "Will you leave the house?" Eleanor looked at the instrument, silent now, its keys still. "No, I'll stay. It's time the music here belonged to the living again." Poirot nodded. "A wise choice, madam. The past should not be forgotten, but neither should it be allowed to play forever." That evening, as Poirot prepared to leave, he paused at the door of the grand hall. The air was calm, the silence clean. He smiled faintly, tipping his hat toward the piano. "Good night, mademoiselle," he murmured. "Your song is finished." But as he turned to go, a single note rang softly through the room. One clear, perfect sound like a sigh. Poirot paused, smiled once more, and whispered. Or perhaps merely paused. Chapter 3. The Shadow of the Melody. The days following Charles Whitfield's arrest passed in a heavy stillness that seemed to settle over Blackwood Manor like a final layer of dust. Yet beneath that calm, something darker moved, a tension, an unfinished chord in the air. Poirot had intended to leave after the case was closed. The crime was clear, the culprit confessed, and Eleanor Whitfield was free from her husband's cruel design. But even as the motor and wire were removed from the cellar, and the piano locked for good, Poirot could not bring himself to depart. For one reason, the music had not stopped. It was 3 nights after the arrest when the butler, Grayson, knocked on Poirot's door, his face pale and frightened. "Sir," he whispered, "you'd better come. It's started again." Poirot set aside his book. "The piano?" Grayson nodded, his hands trembling. "Yes, sir. Midnight again." Poirot rose without a word. The hallway outside was dim, the only light coming from the flickering candles along the walls. The grandfather clock ticked softly, its sound echoing down the corridor like a heartbeat. As they reached the grand hall, Poirot heard it, faint but unmistakable. A slow, sorrowful melody, the same tune as before. He stepped into the room. The piano stood where it always had, the lid closed, the bench empty. Yet the sound filled the space, clear, perfect, alive. Grayson clutched his chest. "But we took the machine apart, sir. There's nothing left." Poirot moved closer, every step deliberate. "Then, my friend, something human must now play the part of the machine." He lifted the piano lid. The keys moved again, softly, pressing down one by one. But this time the sound came not from strings, but from above. Poirot looked up. The chandelier swayed slightly in the draft, its crystal pieces trembling. He noticed a faint vibration running through the ceiling beam, like a tremor. And then he saw it. Hidden in the carved molding above the piano, a second wire, thinner, cleverly disguised, leading up toward the ceiling. "Mr. Grayson," Poirot said quietly, "fetch Miss Clara and Mrs. Whitfield. I fear our melody has not yet finished." Minutes later, Eleanor and Clara entered the hall, both still in their nightclothes. "It's playing again," Clara breathed. "I thought it was over. I thought it was done." Eleanor's face had gone pale. "You said he was in custody, Mr. Poirot." "He couldn't have." "No," Poirot said, "but his hands may not have been the only ones that helped." Clara's eyes widened. "You mean someone else?" "Yes, Miss Clara. Someone who knew the design, or at least enough to continue it. Someone who remained behind, unseen, when all the attention was on Mr. Whitfield." He ran his gloved fingers along the molding, tracing the hidden wire. It ran through the wall, toward the west side of the house. "Come," he said, "let us follow the song." The trail led them through a narrow corridor that had once been used by servants, small, dusty, lined with cobwebs. The wire continued along the wall, disappearing into a locked wooden door at the far end. Grayson fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking. When the door opened, a rush of cold air met them. Inside was a cramped storage room, dark, cluttered, smelling of damp wood and metal. In the corner stood a small table, upon which sat another mechanism, even more crude than the last. A motor, two spools of wire, and a simple timing device made from a clock's inner gears. But there was something else. A photograph. It showed Margaret Whitfield, Eleanor's sister, seated at the piano, smiling. And beside her, not Charles, but Grayson. Eleanor gasped softly. "Grayson?" The butler's face drained of color. "Madam, it's not what it looks like. That was taken years ago, before she married Mr. Charles. She was kind to me. She used to play while I cleaned. She said the piano was alive when I listened." Poirot regarded him carefully. "You loved her." Grayson's eyes filled with tears. "I did, sir. Quietly. From afar. She was gentle. And he swallowed. He ruined her." Poirot nodded slowly. "And when she died, you blamed him." "Yes," Grayson whispered. "When the piano started playing again, I thought it was her. I wanted to believe she was still here, still trying to speak. When you found that first mechanism, I thought maybe it was her, through the wires, through the music. But after you took it away, I couldn't stand the silence. So I made another." Eleanor's hand went to her mouth. "You mean this music, it's you?" Grayson nodded miserably. "I only wanted to hear her again. Just once more. I didn't mean to frighten anyone." Poirot's expression softened. "Ah, mon ami," he caught himself, then said gently, "My friend, grief is a strange thing. It can play tricks on even the kindest soul." He stepped forward and disconnected the motor. The piano fell silent once more. "You must not blame yourself, Mr. Grayson," Poirot said quietly. "But nor must you let the dead speak through your hands. It is a song that never ends and never heals." Grayson bowed his head. "I understand, sir." The next morning, the household seemed lighter somehow, as if the walls themselves had taken a long, deep breath. The piano stood open, silent and harmless in the daylight. Clara found Poirot in the garden, trimming a rose bush with his usual precision. "I can't thank you enough," she said softly. "You saved my aunt's life, and you freed us from this house's madness." Poirot smiled faintly. "My dear Miss Clara, I simply removed the dust so that the truth could shine again. But tell me, do you think your aunt will stay here?" Clara nodded. "Yes. She says the house needs peace, not abandonment. She plans to start a school for music here in Margaret's memory." "Ah," Poirot said, "how fitting, to turn sorrow into song." She smiled faintly. "You should come when it opens. You be our guest of honor. I shall look forward to it." That evening, Poirot began to pack. His small valise sat neatly on the bed, every item folded with perfect symmetry. The sun dipped low, turning the sky a soft gold. He was fastening his coat when a knock sounded on the door. "Enter," he called. Eleanor stepped inside, holding something wrapped in cloth. "Before you go," she said quietly, "I wanted you to have this." She unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay a sheet of music, yellowed with age, written in elegant ink. "The song Margaret used to play," Eleanor said. "It's called The Shadow of the Melody. She wrote it herself. I found it hidden in her desk last night." Poirot took the paper carefully. "May I?" "Of course." He sat at the small writing desk and examined the notes. The piece was beautiful, haunting, yes, but also incomplete. The final line ended abruptly, the ink trailing off the page. "Curious," he murmured. "It seems she never finished it." Eleanor nodded. "She was working on it the night she died." Poirot looked up, thoughtful. "Then perhaps, before I go, we should finish it together." Eleanor smiled faintly through her tears. She would have liked that. They went to the music room. The candles flickered softly, and the piano stood open once more. Poirot placed the sheet upon the stand. Eleanor sat at the bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys, hesitant. "I haven't played in years," she said quietly. "Then tonight, madame," Poirot replied, "you shall play for her, and for yourself." She began slowly, the melody fragile at first, then growing stronger. The notes drifted through the air, filling the manor with life once more. When she reached the final, unfinished measure, she paused. "I don't know how it ends." Poirot smiled gently. "Then perhaps it ends where peace begins." She pressed one final note, soft, lingering, complete. And for a moment, Poirot thought he saw something, a flicker in the candlelight, a shadow at the top of the stairs. A woman standing there, smiling faintly, her eyes full of gratitude. Then the light steadied, and the figure was gone. Eleanor exhaled. "Do you think she heard?" "Yes," Poirot said softly. "I believe she has been listening all along." Later that night, Poirot took one last walk through the empty halls. The silence felt different now, not heavy but calm. He paused by the grand staircase where Margaret had fallen. The floor had been polished again, the crack repaired. Only a faint scar in the wood remained, a quiet memory of what once was. He touched the railing gently. "You may rest now, mademoiselle," he whispered. As he turned to leave, the faintest sound followed him. Not a full melody this time, just a single note, like the closing of a chapter. Poirot smiled. "Good night." He closed the door behind him and stepped out into the cool night air. The stars were faint, the wind quiet, and the manor stood peacefully against the horizon, no longer haunted but healed. Yet, far in the distance, carried on the wind, a single piano note drifted into the darkness. Whether it was memory, echo, or farewell, Poirot could not say. But he listened, as he always did, until the sound faded completely. Chapter 4. The Last Note at Midnight. A week had passed since the final song echoed through the halls of Blackwood Manor. The pianos had been covered, the dust swept, and the rooms that once whispered of death now carried a quiet calm. The villagers below the hill said the house had fallen asleep at last. But for Hercule Poirot, sleep was elusive. Though the case was closed, and both Charles and Grayson had confessed their parts in the strange melody of murder, something in Poirot's precise mind refused to rest. It was as though a single note, faint, incomplete, still lingered in the air, begging to be resolved. He sat in his room at the local inn, the firelight flickering against the small glass of hot chocolate beside him. His fingers drummed on the table, each tap echoing the rhythm of that cursed piano tune. There was a pattern to it, something more deliberate than even grief could explain. He leaned forward and unfolded the sheet of Margaret's final composition, The Shadow of the Melody. The notes stared back, elegant and unfinished. The last line, that abrupt stop, haunted him. Why? Poirot murmured to himself. Would a woman so gifted leave her last song without an ending? He stared at the ink, the way it bled slightly near the end, as if the pen had slipped. There was something there, something small but terribly wrong. Poirot rose, put on his coat, and stepped into the cold night. It was time to return to Blackwood Manor. The house loomed ahead like a monument to secrets, its windows dark, its chimneys still. The iron gate creaked open beneath Poirot's hand, and the gravel crunched softly underfoot. Inside, the caretaker, an old man named Turner, greeted him nervously. "Evening, sir. Didn't expect anyone tonight." Poirot nodded politely. "You will forgive me, monsieur. I mean my friend, for intruding at such an hour. But I must see the music room once more." Turner hesitated. "You'll find it as you left it, sir. Locked up tight." "Excellent," Poirot said. "Then nothing has been disturbed." He took the key from the wall and walked down the familiar corridor. The air inside the manor was colder than before, heavy with dust and memory. When he reached the grand doors, he paused. The air around the piano room seemed charged, as if the silence itself were holding its breath. He unlocked the door. The piano waited in the moonlight, draped in its cover. Poirot walked to it, his steps soft and careful. He removed the cloth and placed the sheet music on the stand. For a moment, nothing. Then from somewhere deep in the house, a sound. One soft, single note. Poirot turned sharply. "Ah," he whispered. "You announce yourself, do you not?" He followed the sound, down the side corridor, past the narrow servant stairs, toward the west wing. It was colder there, and the faint smell of oil and would fill the air. The notes sounded again. Poirot stopped at a small, forgotten parlor, one of the oldest rooms in the manor. In the center stood another piano, smaller, older, coated in dust. A second instrument. He stepped closer, studying it. The lid was open. Inside, instead of strings, there was a small compartment. And inside that, a folded letter. Poirot lifted it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. Margaret Whitfield. He broke the seal. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible. "To whoever finds this, if you hear my song, it means the truth has not yet been spoken. I fear for my life. My husband suspects I know what he has done. He thinks I am weak, but he forgets. I write every secret into my music. I have hidden the proof in the melody itself." The last line holds his confession. Poirot's pulse quickened. He looked back at the unfinished score. The last few notes, the ones that trailed off, weren't just random. They followed a strange pattern, rising and falling in uneven rhythm. He sat at the piano, placed the letter beside the sheet, and began to play softly. The melody was haunting, tender, but as he reached the end, he noticed something extraordinary. Each note corresponded to a letter, a musical cipher. He translated it carefully, a D, F, B, G, and then finally a pause, and the last few notes spelled out 3 distinct letters. "C, H, A." Poirot froze. Then he smiled grimly. "Ah, Charles." The music itself had accused him, her final act of defiance. By morning, Poirot presented the letter and the sheet music to the authorities. Charles Whitfield's confession was now more than his words. It was written in his wife's song. When Eleanor and Clara arrived to meet him, Poirot explained gently. "She was clever, your sister," he said. "Even as she feared for her life, she left behind the truth, hidden where only someone who loved her music could find it." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "So, it was always there all along. Her voice, trying to tell us." Poirot nodded. "Indeed. Sometimes, madam, justice is not spoken in words, but sung in notes." That evening, Eleanor insisted Poirot stay for dinner. The household was quiet again, calmer, softer, the way it should have been all along. Afterward, she asked him to sit in the parlor one last time. The old piano had been moved there, cleaned and polished. The firelight danced across its surface. Eleanor sat at the bench and placed her hands upon the keys. "For Margaret," she said softly. Poirot inclined his head. "For truth." The melody began, the same as before, but this time complete. Eleanor had finished her sister's song, adding the final measures in perfect harmony. As the last note lingered in the air, Poirot felt a stillness settle within him. Not fear, not tension, but peace. When the sound faded, he rose, bowed slightly, and smiled. "The music," he said quietly, "is whole again." Later that night, as Poirot prepared to depart, Clara walked him to the door. "I don't think the manor will ever forget you," she said warmly. "You brought more than truth here. You brought peace." Poirot smiled, adjusting his hat. "Peace, my dear Miss Clara, is the finest melody of all. But remember, sometimes silence speaks the loudest truth." He turned toward the waiting car, his silhouette framed by the dim glow of the lanterns. The wind stirred faintly through the trees, carrying with it what might have been the faint echo of piano music, distant, eternal, unbroken. As the car rolled down the long drive, Poirot looked back once more at Blackwood Manor. Its windows glimmered faintly under the moonlight, no longer cold or accusing, just quiet, like a soul at rest. He spoke softly to himself. "One must always listen," he said, "even to the silence between the notes." The next morning, in his small notebook, he wrote his final thought. Case closed. The piano played for love, for grief, and for truth. But in the end, it played for peace. Poirot closed the book, placed it neatly on the table, and smiled. If you enjoyed this mystery, my friends, do not let it end here. There are more shadows waiting to be uncovered, more secrets waiting for the light. Subscribe to Haunting Veils and join me again for another night, another case, and another truth.